Welcome to another episode of Hemp Barons. I'm Dan Humiston, and on today's show, Joy is joined by one of the United States' leading hemp seed producers. They talk about the challenges creating hemp seeds that increase yield and enable large-scale production. Their conversation covers all aspects of hemp genetics, including future opportunities. Let's join Joy's conversation with Wendy Mosher from New West Genetics.
Well, welcome to Hemp Barons, Miss Wendy. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Joy.
You know, you and your husband, Dr. John McKay, there are couples, very special couples. I can count them on one hand around the globe who are as dedicated and have already contributed so much to the world's most versatile, valuable crop, hemp. And certainly you do that through New West Genetics in Colorado. You're global leader in hemp seed genetics, in education, in advancing this emerging crop, recognizing what the market needs are. Before we get into everything that you do and all that you're involved in, can you share with the listeners what brought you to hemp, Wendy?
Sure. Well, a very circuitous route, certainly. John and I have been together for over 20 years. We have two different careers in many ways. However, as a couple, we share in each other's lives pretty deeply. So as John was traveling through his schooling from, PhD to postdoc to his professorship, we moved around the country and even the world quite a bit, always, interacting and meeting with plant scientists. And so I developed, though I am a natural born educator, I developed an interest as well in agriculture, a little bit more at the applied level than John. So I have a passion for sustainability, for, improving world food systems while still, maintaining and feeding the world. It's a tremendous challenge. I feel very passionate about the fact that it's a complex solution, and will involve many solutions. And I passionately believe that hemp is part of that solution. So that's how I came to it. And in a more direct sense, we happened to be, half our story is truly, it's not just John and my other partner, Rich's expertise, but it's also just being fortunate enough to have been in Colorado when that farm bill passed.
And you really found yourself at the epicenter nationally. What are some of the most popular genetics that you folks are selling right now through New West Genetics? I know obviously we have infrastructure set up for the hemp extract or cannabinoids types of varieties, and certainly we're looking to expand in a huge way. And of course, as you mentioned, feeding the world, which is my passion, the grain and fiber varieties. That hemp seed, as you well know, is a superfood that needs a super cape. It is so nutrient dense, the highest form of digestible protein in the entire plant and animal kingdom. What are you seeing right now from farmers through New West Genetics in terms of what they're planting?
So certainly I'll talk about the genetic gains that we've made and how they apply. I just want to say that our industry, Joy, as you know, has always been kind of cart before the horse, and that was absolutely out of necessity and understandable. However, when New West started, we wanted to put the horse back in front, and we knew it would take years. So we were looking at products, years down the line. It takes a good 4 years to create a stable variety with all the traits you want. So our varieties don't just have one trait. They have, between 12, 16 traits. So of course, the market right now's attention is on CBD and other cannabinoids. However, when you think about acreage, right, which is how we think about in agriculture, it's not just about the money. It's about what is going to demand the most acreage, and we see that in grain. So our first variety we created, the first and foremost trait we knew we needed to do was below 0.3 THC. We've always put compliance first. So that was our first goal, along with all the agronomic traits that make it a mechanically planted and harvested crop. So the one we sell the most, the long answer, the one we sell the most right now is our grain variety, because those are the first, there's two actually now that are Usda certified, which was another goal of ours to provide more value to farmers, are those. Our most in demand, I would say, although we haven't released it yet because it's not quite right for us yet. We want to do one more year and get it certified before we release, is our enhanced CBD variety Abound. So we've got Abound in the queue, and then we have Abound Plus the following year that will be coming out. Both of them are certified, will enter Usda certification. I don't want to be presumptuous this coming season, the 2020 season. So those, they're by no means the only traits we work on, but we knew we needed to get those out first. And we're very excited in some ways about the IFR because we have put compliance first. So, we've created dioecious, they're all dioecious. So that means they have separate males and separate females, which is unusual in agriculture, but we believe it's the most cost-effective way to produce the plant. They're all dioecious, and we've created this compliant THC as well as, very enhanced CBD varieties. So we're proud of that. It's not usual in the industry, but I believe that's the way this is going to be produced long term, because you can get both the seed to use for grain as well as the flower for its nutraceutical magic.
It's so important to continue to educate folks that we're really talking about the whole plant here. And when we're talking about a plant as unique as hemp, where every single part of it not only can be used, but has very unique and useful purposes that set it apart from the rest of the fibers or grains or oil seeds. For example, as you well know, even the root balls contain valuable and unique triterpenes that are difficult to locate anywhere in the plant kingdom, and they don't exist in any other part of the plant. And then, of course, we have the longest, strongest fiber in the world in that stalk, the outer bast fiber, that bark, and the inner woody core. We're talking paper, textiles, building materials, biocomposites, bioresins, energy, supercapacitors, fuel, nanotechnology. And then, of course, we have that nutrient-dense seed that not only, of course, that highest digestible form of protein, but the perfect ratio of omega-3s and vitamins and minerals and folic acid and soluble and insoluble dietary fiber and all of that. And then, of course, the incredibly valuable cannabinoids and terpenes in the flowering tops and the leaves and the resins. And we want to be able to use all of that. And it's going to take technology in order for us to be able to use all the parts of the plant that we're growing and in the same crop. And it's going to take brilliant breeders like you and your husband and your counterparts around the world. I also want to just make sure the listeners know we use a lot of acronyms in our industry. And so when Wendy talks about the IFR, she's talking about the USDA's interim final rule, which they published in the Federal Register on October 31st. That's for the domestic hemp production program, currently in a comment period. But they're testing and sampling guidelines, which are the main focus of these public comments because they're so stringent and in many ways onerous and unreasonably so, involving the DEA and so on and so forth. But they're very strict, and you have to be extremely compliant. And when we talk about Usda, Wendy is referring to the Association of Official Seed Certifying Agencies. And so Usda, as well as the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperative Development, have developed schemes for some years now to certify pedigreed seeds in hemp that are unique, distinct, and stable, which is really how agriculture works. And while we certainly have many varieties throughout the world that have already many hemp varieties, grain and fiber varieties, that have been certified as unique, distinct, and stable, as the crop emerged here in the United States, we realized, well, some of the grain varieties that are growing great in Manitoba don't grow so wonderfully in Kentucky with that photo period and that climate. And so it's just a very exciting revolution. But with the extract hemp, and I think what really underscores, Wendy, when you say how it's unusual, what you have been able to accomplish at New West, is these extract varieties, of course, are newer. They CBD from hemp and cannabinoids being extracted from the hemp plant sort of hit us all like a ton of bricks 6 or so years ago. And these grain and fiber varieties, we'd been breeding the resins down, essentially breeding the cannabinoids down in order to make sure we'd stay compliant, well under that 0.3 THC limit or threshold. And when the extracts came around, we started breeding the resins back in. And of course, that THC is the wiliest one. Could you share with us a story, Wendy, about some of the challenges or an interesting discovery that you made trying to accomplish what you have in fact done, and that is to make a unique, distinct, and stable high cannabinoid variety of hemp?
Sure. So, there wasn't a lot of data on that pathway prior to, 2014 when we started. It was thought that it was impossible to sort of separate those two cannabinoids because they were on the same pathway. Now, we've absolutely seen breeders, prior to us have success in doing that. Although, getting it compliant wasn't, I think they absolutely could have had success. It just wasn't a priority, And so it's what we found is that because we breed multiple traits, it just took longer, right? Because it wasn't our primary trait. Had we just focused on that, we probably could have done it, I'd say, like 3 seasons earlier. But it's just about selection. Genetics is a numbers game. It's simply about selection and numbers and being willing to throw away 99% of what you grow each season in each turn of your breeding cycle. So, it's certainly possible for anyone to repeat what we did as if they're using, highly selective breeder traits. It just wasn't profitable to do so. So it's Joy, what I'm saying basically is it's not a big secret for commercial breeders to understand how to do that. However, it just takes, resolve and strength. And if you're like us and you weren't putting profits first for the first few years, you had to raise money. So that's what we did. And you have to get a second mortgage on your house, et cetera, and put up your daughter's college funds. So that's sort of what we did. But we knew there was no way this plant was not going to be a big hit. One discovery we did make that is sort of new data as of last year for us. John looks very deeply at genetics by environment impact. And a pretty common belief, just because we didn't know any better, in hemp was that those cannabinoids can just vary wildly and unpredictably by their environment. And what we've discovered through resequencing a number of varieties, public, as well as things grown in variety trials, is that indeed the cannabinoids are over 80% controlled by genetics, which is awesome news. So in well-bred certified variety, or not necessarily certified, but any well-bred variety, stable over, multiple breeding seasons, and then grown out to prove that it's stable multiple times, we see the genetics stable across regions. Now, when I say stable, I mean, not varying more than maybe 1/100%. So it's not impactful on that compliance piece, but you'll still see it, varying a tiny bit out there. So that's wonderful news. It's been proven through those EU and Canadian varieties, while they may not perform in yield, which is highly controlled by environment, it's more like 50-50, right, for yield impacts. It's just wonderful news that we can achieve that consistency across regions, and should give everyone sort of relief, right? That it can be done, it'll be okay. We always say with our varieties, you don't have to test prior to harvest. You can just be confident that when we release something, it will be compliant to harvest. Full maturity, I should say.
And yes, and in fact, there was the policy as things evolved in Canada, because they started regulating in 1998. And then probably about 3 years ago, it may be 4 now, time passes so quickly in this revolution, they began a policy where, hey, if the variety had tested below 0.2, and their threshold is not greater than 0.3%, but for this policy, it says if your varieties are testing below 0.2 for 2 years in a row, then we're no longer going to require field testing. You're on the exempted field testing list, and we'll be excited for something like that to happen. I think another of the many disappointments that we see in the IFR, the USDA's interim final rule, is no mention of a seed certification program in there. What do you think about that, Wendy? What if you got to set policy, and I know you're involved on so many levels of setting policy in the state and even at the national level, what would you say if you got to write, what would be the key points for seed certification within our own domestic program, with the regulator being the United States Department of Ag?
So seed certification and the interim final rule. I think about this from two different perspectives, one as an industry member and one as a regulator. If I were a regulator, I would absolutely want certified seed only, because that would make my job easier. As an industry member, I recognize that folks want to see their high CBD. That's what they value in seed. It is more efficient in extraction. The fact that there isn't a lot of certified seed that is high CBD gives me pause. Our recommendations to the USDA is that, either one, they consider two things. We live in America, right? People want choice. They don't want to be forced to choose only certified seed. They don't do that in any other crop. Canada and Europe, of course, demand certified seed only, but we do things a little differently. And I like that because that, saves space for innovation. So what I think would be useful is either one, phase in certified seed for a period of 2 to 3 years, when I think there will be plentiful CBD varieties that are certified. So either phase it in or give incentives for people who use certified seed. Like you mentioned, Joy, prior, maybe those are exempt from testing. I wouldn't say forever, because in order to continue to keep a variety pure, you must rogue every few years, or you must create a better variety. So you've got to keep track of it, because it will, generally kind of, some folks will say drift. I think that's the improper genetic term for it, but it doesn't stay as pure. So you've got to rogue, which means you go through and clean it up at, around flowering time, and then again at when it's mature. And by flowering time, I mean males, and then also, when the females are mature. So there's work that you have to do to maintain that genetic purity, which is why I think every 3 years or so doing a THC validation is not a bad idea. But giving those incentives, and perhaps another incentive that could be granted is a tiered system of crop insurance. So of course, if you're using a certified seed, it's got way more assurance. Insurance companies would like that, right? Something that's been validated by third parties. So that should be either reimbursed at a higher level or things like that.
So fantastic. I love these insights, and this is really fantastic. And I'm sure that that the USDA is certainly thinking about those things, particularly on the federal crop insurance side, which I know is still very much in a development phase.
I want to take a quick break to thank you for listening to today's show. As the exclusive Cannabis Podcast Network, we're constantly adding new cannabis podcasts to support our industry's growth. And that's why we're so excited to welcome the Seed to Sound podcast to our network. The team at Seed to Sound has produced over 50 exciting and thought-provoking cannabis podcasts. And now you can listen to all their previous episodes and all their new episodes at MJBulls.com. So welcome, Seed to Sound, and stay tuned for new, exciting cannabis podcasts on the MJBulls Cannabis Podcast Network.
I also know you're very much involved with the Hemp Feed Coalition, and we've had folks on. We've had Amy Rouse, We've had Ethan Voorhees on the show before, who I know, of course, are also very involved in the Hemp Feed Coalition. Can you talk a little bit about why it's so important for us to open up this market, expand these markets for farmers, but even in the entire food chain? And if you can tie it into it, and it very much is tied into, of course, carbon emissions, what does it mean to really be able to get ag feed, to get the hemp seed, this valuable, nutritious seed, approved to feed our agricultural livestock and cattle and all of the species?
So one, I want to talk about how it impacts the industry first, and then I'm going to get to health. It is essential to the vigor and the health of our industry that we get this approved in animal feed. We will never be taken seriously as a crop. We will always be around, maybe 200, 300,000 acres, which is not much in ag, unless we get approved in feed. And the other reason that's important, Joy, is for your fiber applications as well. So we've got issues right now with large grain processors and even, feed formulators that we can't get them enough for them to bother even running a test. So the acres are highly important, and that will come when, people are dying to put this in food, that in animal feed. They get it. They really want to put these products out. And of course, God love our industry, people are already doing it, even though it's not approved, which I do love that rebellious spirit. But it's essential to getting this into the food chain, as you said, and for the life of our industry. We need to see those acres so that we can really penetrate. The nutrition, and you already hit the nail on the head about the omegas. There's no other plant that compares with this ratio, and it can compete with fish. And we've got, some tremendous challenges in our oceans with depleting the supply of species. And so why not use something more sustainable, a better source of omega-3s? We don't make them ourselves. We have to get that externally. It's essential for human health. So why not source that from hemp, number one? But also on the feed side, it has all 9 essential proteins, right? So it can compete with soy. However, thus far, we've seen studies that show it's more digestible in ruminants than soy. So we've got some data on that. We have data on it increasing the omega-3 in hens. And it also has a really interesting lipid called gamma-linoleic acid, GLA, which there's no other plant that has as much of this very healthy lipid. So if you look up some papers, you'll find some details on that. But it's so unique, Joy, but we need the scale, and we're not going to really go far without that scale. And that's why it's essential to get it into feed. Let alone, right, if we consume animals, those animals eating, a healthier food source instead of just corn, which corn is great for, a couple of things, but let's face it, it's not nearly as nutritious as hemp. But it's got to be affordable. All these decisions that people make, and this ties into feeding the world, it's all about cost right now because it's such overwhelming numbers that they have to hit. What we hope to achieve is and I think it's happening a little, is even if we can get a slight shift in consciousness about the long-term value. So putting numbers to the long-term value of health of animals and humans. I think we're starting to see that shift when people talk about, the cost of healthcare, et cetera. If we can head that off by eating healthier in the first place to prevent some of, this need, but it involves thinking about more than just your company, right, and your company's bottom line. So that's the challenge. That's always been the conflict and the rub. So I hope I answered your question. I probably went a very circuitous route.
It's so thorough and so insightful and very, very valuable. You folks have studied, continue to study, are making the way through this industry. So no, everything that you say is quite valuable to us and to the listeners. You also, Newest Genetics also sells various products. You've got flower products. You sell grain in addition to the genetics. Would you tell us a little bit about those products?
Sure. So we don't, the selling, we've created extract this year because we test our varieties before we put them out. So our goal is to sell seed. That's always been our goal, but we're basically helping fund our company by selling byproducts of that research. So anytime you create a seed variety, you must bulk it up. So you have to have a season where you multiply that seed. So once you stabilize it, then it needs that extra season to do so. So if we've got this, CBD variety, why let that flower go to waste, right? So, and then we learn things too for our farmers on the agronomy, on the harvest methods, et cetera. So we can add value that way with the seed. We can add the knowledge of, actual production. This is how you produce it. So yes, we create extraction. We take flower through extraction with some trusted partners. We have some wonderful distillate this year that it's beautiful and it's really has a lovely profile. We also have, and in each variety, it's, of course, really interesting to see what those profiles are and to take it through to distillate so we can see how it results in the more final product, although really it's wholesale. So that's highly informative to breeders. How any crop is processed helps inform us and helps us make different choices sometimes for selection so that we can suit processing best. So you asked about products. So those, yes, we create grain, but now that our grain varieties are fully stable, fully certified, we will just license that seed. So we've got some great partners who are very highly adept and have all the infrastructure for grain processing, post-processing, storage facilities, et cetera. So our, right now and every year we release a new CBD or a new cannabinoid variety. There will be, distillate coming from that. On the fiber side, I just wanted to address something. You talked about all those applications and they're very exciting, but as far as a breeding perspective goes, thus far we haven't found that we can create a triple, use variety, and I mean flower, grain, fiber yet for those long fibers. So a lot of energy goes into the plant when it's creating, those very tall fiber varieties, and you'll get less flower. However, I think the exciting innovations you are talking about of, adjusting the processing method and maybe even some kind of chemical applications through the processing may not make it as important that we have the long fibers for certain applications like paper, like building materials. So I just want to put a call out to people who have innovative processing methods on the fiber side. We always want to stay in touch with those people so we understand, their needs as far as what it needs to look like when it comes out in the biomass. So that was just a shout out and for help on our end.
And Wendy, what do you see as the challenges for getting ag feed approved by ASCO, by the FDA? I know that I lived in Washington State for some years and was very much a part of the emergence of the crop there through lawmaking and rulemaking. And there was a study. We passed a law at one point that directed the Washington State Department of Ag to study the laying hen. And it took a year, and it was some 40-something pages long, I think. But in the end, it seemed that it was this concern over the potential bioaccumulation of THC, and almost also not that there was any evidence of that. That just seemed to be this remaining concern, and that they needed to do more research. And further, that there was even a consumer perception concern, like, oh my goodness, if we start allowing our dairy cows and our laying hens in the state of Washington to be fed hemp seeds, maybe the consumers will be afraid that milk and eggs from the state of Washington will get them intoxicated. What do you see around these challenges or around those particular concerns?
I understand that concern. These producers have a lot at risk. I understand that concern back then. I believe the industry has done an incredible job at educating the public, and it's just going to accelerate now that the Farm Bill, the 2018 Farm Bill, has legalized it federally. So I believe at that time, I understand why they had that concern. Here when Colorado went through that process of studying kind of the landscape of research and what do we need to do policy-wise to get this approved, that was led by the Colorado Department of Ag. What do we need to do to get this approved in feed? We worked with the Cattlemen's Association, and they have a tremendous amount at stake because these people are international businessmen, right? And women, and or they're national. They're moving products from state to state. And they didn't have any education on what feed would look like. We didn't have numbers, right, of the different constituents for them. So I absolutely understand. One key piece that people didn't understand at the time that they need to understand is that cannabinoids are not present in the seed. They are not present. They develop in the trichomes as the flower develops. So it's, days and days and days after the plant begins growing that you see them. Now, where we get into trouble as an industry and where we need to be tip-top shape is the conditioning and cleaning of the seed. So imagine, if you will, a beautiful flower. As the seed develops, of course it develops in the flower, right? So it's touching cannabinoids. So all we need to do, and every other country has shown this with the human food that has allowed hemp, so in Europe as well as in Canada, that indeed you can clean it well enough that the cannabinoids are not present, that the THC is down to the parts per million or whatever level that it needs to be to put products out that are safe for humans. Now, the FDA knows this. AFCO understands this. They just need to see the research. They can't move without the research. So you asked what the challenge is. And the Hemp Feed Coalition, by the way, developed out of this, effort by Colorado Department of Ag, and this actual report they created for the legislature, saying, here's our recommended next steps, is that we set up this kind of, unified association between vets, between industry, the feed industry, between the hemp industry, to help move these through the FDA. And the FDA was a part of all of those discussions and that work. Extremely supportive of grain and animal feed, absolutely supportive. They just need to see these holes filled with the research. And so we started the Hemp Feed Coalition with the sole mission to support and shepherd applications, food application petitions through the FDA, and they work closely with AFCO, the Association of American Association of Feed Certifying, their organization. So they set standards and nutrition definitions for the feed. So the challenge is that the industry needs to step up. We need to support. We've got 13 unfunded research studies that are going to plug these holes. So if you are in the hemp industry, you will benefit from increased acreage, which I don't know a single, company that will not. You need to step up and contribute. It won't take a lot if we all step up, right? But it needs to happen. And these studies, the good news is they can happen quick. I've heard of 3-month turnaround on animal studies. So it's unheard of. It's back-assed, of course, that it was approved for humans before it was approved for animals. I don't think that's ever happened for any other food source. So if we can all work together, please look up hempfeedcoalition.org. Make a contribution. Your contribution, those dollars are so stringently spent. We all approve the budget for the year. You've got about 12 industry leaders looking at that budget and approving it to make sure it's spent as much as possible on the efficient means and application to the FDA. Super helpful. So please contribute.
It's absolutely everything. It's everything. And folks can contribute by going to, I believe it is friendsofhemp.org. And I'm checking right now in case it's friendsofhemp.com, because it makes a big difference and we don't want to get it wrong. And if I remember correctly, I got it wrong when we had Miss Annie on, but of course she corrected me. I am not sure. Do you know yes, friendsofhemp.org, everybody, friendsofhemp.org.
Yeah, it's .org. And the good news is your contribution is tax deductible. So we work with Friends of Hemp. They are our fiscal sponsor. Amazing organization, is handling the financials entirely for Hemp Feed Coalition. Very responsible board there. And they are a 501c3, so your donation is tax deductible.
Such fantastic work, such important work. You are really, as I often describe it to the heroes that are on the show and heroines on the show, chopping the wood and carrying the water for this industrial, agricultural, and public health revolution and animal health revolution. Wendy, thank you for everything that you and your husband, Dr. John McKay, do every day for hemp. I'm looking forward to our next encounter and to continue to learn from you and to work with you as we deliver the promise of hemp. Thank you so much for being with us today, Wendy.
Thank you too, Joy. It's a pleasure talking with you as always.